Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm sorry if the lighting is a little off, but I have my reading lamp here that's normally shining on me. I hope everyone is doing well tonight. Now I'm just going to slip on over to Facebook and hang on a second. There we go. There we go. And I will be right with you folks. There we go. There we go. Oh, God, I got to turn that off. Hey. How's it going? Joyce Yaffe, we'd be buzzing. All right, I got my little reading lamp here. And I'm going to go behind the fan for a second, waiting for a few more people to come. Oh. I had a rough day today. Not rough in the way that I normally, like, yeah, I've been in pain. Yeah, I'm tired. I didn't want to get out of bed. And then I realized that I'm just, I've been hit with about a depression, which happens. Even though I am medicated for depression, it still happens. Like normal people get depressed now and then. Being medicated for it doesn't mean you never get depressed. It just means you never get to the point where, someone could get hurt or, all those things, right? So anyway, chapter 41. Oh my goodness, look how much we have left. And I think I'm going to go on with the rest of the Little House books after this. The next book in the series is Little Town on the Prairie. Remember we did The Long Winter? Unless we want to read The Long Winter again this year, but we already did that live. Chapter 41, Learning to Forget. Amy's lecture did Laurie good, though, of course, he did not own it till long afterward. Men seldom do. For when women are the advisors, the lords of creation don't take the advice till they have persuaded themselves that it is just what they intended to do. Then they act upon it, and if it succeeds, they give the weaker vessel half the credit of it. If it fails, they generously give her the whole. Laurie went back to his grandfather and was so dutifully devoted for several weeks that the old gentleman declared the climate of Nice had improved him wonderfully, and he had better try it again. There was nothing the young gentleman would have liked better, but elephants could not have dragged him back after the scolding he received. Pride forbid, and whenever the longing grew very strong, he fortified his resolution by repeating the words that had made the deepest impression. I despise you. Go and do something splendid that will make her love you. Laurie turned the matter over in his mind so often that he soon brought himself to confess that he had been selfish and lazy. But then when a man has a great sorrow, he should be indulged in all sorts of vagaries, till he has lived it down. He felt that his blighted affections were quite dead now, and though he should never cease to be faithful mourner, there was no occasion to wear his weeds ostentatiously. Jo wouldn't love him, but he might make her respect and admire him by doing something which should prove that the girl's no had not spoiled his life. He had always meant to do something, and Amy's advice was quite unnecessary. He had only been waiting till the aforesaid blighted affections were decently interred. That being done, he felt that he was ready to hide his stricken heart and still toil on. As goeth, he had a joy or a grief, put into song. So Laurie resolved to embalm his love sorrow in music and compose a requiem which should harrow up Joe's soul and melt the heart of every hearer. Therefore, the next time the old gentleman found him getting restless and moody and ordered him off, he went to Vienna, where he had musical friends and fell to work with the firm determination to distinguish himself. But whether the sorrow was too vast to be embodied in music, or music was too ethereal to uplift a mortal woe, he soon discovered that the requiem was beyond him just at present. It was evident that his mind was not in working order yet, and his ideas needed clarifying, for often in the middle of a plaintive strain, he would find himself humming a dancing tune that vividly recalled the Christmas ball at Nice, especially the stout Frenchman, and put an effectual stop to tragic composition for the time being. Sounds like he's healing, doesn't it? And then he tried opera, for nothing seemed impossible in the beginning. But here again, unforeseen difficulties beset him. He wanted Joe for his heroine and called upon his memory to supply him with tender recollections and romantic visions of his love. But memory turned traitor, and as if possessed by the perverse spirit of the girl who would only recall Joe's oddities, faults, and freaks, would only show her in the most unsentimental aspects, beating mats with her head tied up in a bandana, barricading herself with the sofa pillow, or throwing cold water over his passion a la gummage, whatever that is. Gummage. Passion a la gummage, and an irresistible laugh spoilt the pensive picture he was endeavoring to paint. Joe wouldn't be put into the opera at any price, and he had to give her up with a bless that girl. What a torment she is, and clutch at his hair as became a distracted composer. Hi, Sue. Hi, Lisa. How are you? When he looked about him for another and less intractable damsel to immortalize in melody, memory produced one with the most obliging readiness. This phantom wore many faces, but it always had golden hair, was enveloped in a diaphanous cloud, and floated airily before his mind's eye in a pleasing chaos of roses, peacocks, white peonies, and blue ribbons. He did not give the complacent wraith any name, but he took her for his heroine and grew quite fond of her, as he well might, for he gifted her with every gift and grace under the sun, and escorted her unscathed through trials which would have annihilated any mortal woman. Thanks to this inspiration, he got on swimmingly for a time, but gradually the work lost its charm and he forgot to compose. While he sat musing, pen in hand, or roamed about the gay city to get new ideas and refresh his mind, which seemed to be somewhat unsettled state that winter, he did not do much, but he thought a great deal and was conscious of a change of some sort going on in spite of himself. It's genius simmering, perhaps. I'll let it simmer and see what comes of it, he said with a secret suspicion, all the while that it wasn't genius, but something far more common. Whatever it was, it simmered to some purpose, for he grew more and more discontented with his desultory life, began to long for some real and earnest work to go at, soul and body, and finally came to the wise conclusion that everyone who loved music was not a composer. Returning from one of Mozart's grand operas, splendidly performed at the Royal Theatre, he looked over his own, played a few of the best parts, sat staring at the busts of Mendelssohn, Beethoven, and Bach, who stared benignly back. Then suddenly he tore up his music sheets one by one, and as the last fluttered out of his hand, he said soberly to himself, "She is right. Talent isn't genius, and you can't make it so. That music has taken the vanity out of me as Rome took it out of her, and I won't be a humbug any longer. Now what shall I do?" That seemed a hard question to answer, and Laurie began to wish he had to work for his daily bread. If I can get a copy of Little Men, Let me know in the comments after this closes whether you'd like me to read that next. But I'm not sure if I can get a copy of it. So what shall I do? That seemed a hard question to answer, and Laurie began to wish he had to work for his daily bread. Now, if ever, occurred an eligible opportunity for going to the devil, as he once forcibly expressed it, for he had plenty of money and nothing to do, and Satan is proverbially fond of providing employment for full and idle hands. The poor fellow had temptations enough from without and from within, but he withstood them pretty well. For much as he valued liberty, he valued good faith and confidence more. So his promise to his grandfather and his desire to be able to look honestly into the eyes of the women who loved him and say, all's well, kept him safe and steady. Very likely some Mrs. Grundy will observe, I don't believe it. Boys will be boys, young men must sow their wild oats, and women must not expect miracles. My husband's a miracle. Our relationship is a miracle. I dare say you don't, Mrs. Grundy, but it's true nevertheless. Women work a good many miracles, and I have a persuasion that they may perform even that of raising the standard of manhood by refusing to echo such sayings. Let the boys be boys, the longer the better, and let the young men sow their wild oats if they must. But mothers, sisters, and friends may help make the crop a small one and keep many tares from spoiling the harvest by believing and showing that they believe in the possibility of loyalty to the virtues which make men manliest in good women's eyes. Let's just read that again. Let's just read that again, because I think this bears repeating in this horrific feminist perversion of society. You know, feminism isn't what it was set out to be, right? And I got to tell you, I'm a feminist in the point, to the point where I believe that, you know, women should have equal rights for equal work, equal pay for equal work. Okay. But anything more than that, women are still women. Now let's read this again, because, oh, honey, someday I will tell, I've been given permission by Howie that someday I will tell the story of our how we got sober and why. Very likely some Mrs. Grundy will observe, I don't believe it. Boys will be boys. Young men must sow their wild oats, and women must not expect miracles. I dare say you don't, Mrs. Grundy, but it's true nevertheless. Women work a good many miracles, and I have a persuasion that they may perform even that of raising the standards of manhood by refusing to echo such sayings. In other words, don't excuse bad behavior with boys must be boys. Okay? Let the boys be boys, the longer the better, and let the young men sow their wild oats if they must. But mothers, sisters, and friends may help them to make the crop a small one and keep many tares from spoiling the harvest by believing and showing that they believe in the possibility of loyalty to virtues which make the manliest, make men the manliest in a good woman's eyes. If it is a feminine delusion, leave us to enjoy it while we may, for without it, half the beauty and the romance of life is lost. And sorrowful forebodings would embitter all our hopes of the brave, tender-hearted little lads who still love their mothers better than themselves and are not ashamed to own it. Laurie thought that the task of forgetting his love for Joe would absorb all his powers for years, but to his great surprise, he discovered it grew easier every day. He refused to believe it at first, got angry with himself, and couldn't understand it. But these hearts of ours are curious and contrary things, and time and nature work their will in spite of us. There was a time when I thought that I would never get over losing Arthur's father, him leaving me as a single parent. And guess what? I wasn't meant to have him. I was meant to have Howard. the man that everyone just shook their head when we first got together and thought, if that lasts a year, it'll be a miracle. Today, July 4th, 2024, is the 34th anniversary of the day Howie and I hand fasted and jumped the broom. We got legally married 3 years later. And I'll tell you something, nobody got it. Nobody understood, right? They thought he was a waste of oxygen. I beg to differ. Laurie's heart wouldn't ache. The wound persisted in healing with a rapidity that astonished him. And instead of trying to forget, he found himself trying to remember. He had not foreseen this turn of affairs. Oh, I'm sweating and I'm itchy and I'm going for a swim before bed. First swim of the year, too. He had not foreseen this turn of affairs and was not prepared for it. He was disgusted with himself, surprised at his own fickleness, and full of queer mixture of disappointment and relief that he could recover from such a tremendous blow so soon. He carefully stirred up the embers of his lost love, but they refused to burst into a blaze. There was only a comfortable glow that warmed and did him good without putting him into a fever, and he was reluctantly obliged to confess that the boyish passion was slowly subsiding into a more tranquil sentiment, very tender, a little sad and resentful still, but that was sure to pass away in time, leaving a brotherly affection which would last unbroken to the end. As the word brotherly passed through his mind in one of these reveries, he smiled and glanced up at the picture of Mozart that was before him. Well, he was a great man. And when he couldn't have one sister, he took the other and was happy. Laurie did not utter the words, but he thought them. And the next instant, he kissed the little gold ring, saying to himself, "No, I won't. I haven't forgotten. I never can. I'll try again. And if that fails, why then?" Leaving his sentence unfinished, he seized a pen and paper and wrote to Jo, telling her that he could not settle to anything while there was at least hope of her changing her mind. Couldn't she, wouldn't she? And let him come home and be happy. While waiting for an answer, he did nothing, but he did it energetically, for he was in a fever of impatience. It came at last and settled his mind effectually on the point, for Jo decidedly couldn't and wouldn't. She was wrapped up in Beth and never wished to hear the word love again. Then she begged him to be happy with somebody else, but always to keep a little corner of his heart for his loving sister Jo. In a postscript, she desired him not to tell Amy that Beth was worse. She was coming home in the spring, and there was no need of saddening the remainder of her stay. That would be time enough, please God. But Laurie must write to her often and not let her feel lonely, homesick, or anxious. "So I will at once, poor little girl. It will be a sad going home for her, I'm afraid." And Laurie opened his desk as if writing to Amy had been the proper conclusion of the sentence left unfinished from weeks before. Excuse me. I'm really hot. But he did not write the letter that day, for as rummaging out his best paper, he came across something which changed his purpose. Tumbling about in one part of his desk among bills, passports, and business documents of various kinds were several of Jo's letters. And in another compartment were 3 notes from Amy, carefully tied up with one of her blue ribbons and sweetly suggestive of the little dead roses put away inside. With a half-repentant, half-amused expression, Laurie gathered up all Jo's letters, smoothed, folded, and put them neatly into a small drawer of the desk. Took a minute turning the ring thoughtfully on his finger, then he slowly drew it off, lay it with the letters, locked the drawer, and went out to hear High Mass at St. Stephen's, feeling as if there had been a funeral And though not overwhelmed with affliction, this seemed a more proper way to spend the rest of the day than in writing letters to charming young ladies. The letter went very soon, however, and was promptly answered, for Amy was homesick and confessed it in the most delightful, confiding manner. The correspondence flourished famously, and letters flew to and fro with unfailing regularity all through the spring, early spring. Laurie sold his busts, made allumettes of his opera, and went back to Paris, hoping somebody would arrive before long. He wanted desperately to go to Nice, but would not till he was asked, and Amy would not ask him, for just then she was having little experiences of her own, which made her rather wish to avoid the quizzical eyes of our boy. Fred Vaughn had returned and put the question to which she had once decided to answer yes, thank you, but now she said no, thank you, kindly but steadily. For when the time came, her courage failed her, and she found something that more than money and position was needed to satisfy the new longing that filled her heart, so full of tender hopes and fears. The words, "Fred is a good fellow, but not the man I fancy you would ever like," and Laurie's face when he uttered them kept returning to her as perniciously as her own did when she said, in look, if not words, "I shall marry for money." It troubled her to remember that now, and she wished she could take it back. It sounded so unwomanly. She didn't want Laurie to think her heartless, worldly creature. She didn't care to be a queen of society now half so much as she did to be a lovable woman. She was so glad he didn't hate her for the dreadful things she said, but took them so beautifully and was kinder than ever. His letters were such a comfort, for the home letters were very irregular and were not half so satisfactory as his when they did come. It was not only a pleasure, but a duty to answer them, for the poor fellow was forlorn and needed petting since Joe persisted in being so stony-hearted. She ought to have made an effort and tried to love him if it couldn't be very hard. To love him, it couldn't be very hard. Many people would be proud and glad to have such a dear boy care for them. But Joe never would act like other girls. So there was nothing to do but be very kind and treat him like a brother. If all brothers were treated as well as Laurie was at this period, they would be much happier race of beings than they are. Amy never lectured now. She asked his opinion on all subjects and was interested in everything he did, making charming little presents for him, and sent him 2 letters a week full of lively gossip, sisterly confidences, and captivating sketches of the lovely scenes about her. So in other words, she refused Fred and didn't even tell Laurie that he asked. As few brothers are complimented by having their lectures carried about in their sisters' pockets, read and reread diligently, cried over when short, and kissed when long, and treasured carefully, we will not hint that Amy did any of these things, these fond and foolish things. But she certainly did grow a little pale and pensive that spring, lost much of her relish for society, and went out sketching alone a good deal. She never had much to show when she came home, but was studying nature, I dare say, while she sat for hours with her hands folded on the terrace at Valrosa, or absently sketched any fancy that occurred to her: a stalwart knight on a carved tomb, a young man asleep in the grass with his hat over his eyes, or a curly-haired girl in gorgeous array promenading down a ballroom on the arm of a tall gentleman, both faces being left a blur according to the last fashion in art, which was safe but not altogether satisfactory. Her aunt thought that she regretted her answer to Fred, and finding denials useless and explanations impossible, Amy left her to think what she liked, taking care that Laurie should know that Fred had gone to Egypt. That was all, but he understood it and looked relieved as he said to himself with a venerable air, "I was sure she would think better of it. Poor old fellow. I've been through it all and I can sympathize." With that, he heaved a great sigh, and then, as if he had discharged his duty to the past, put his feet up on the sofa and enjoyed Amy's letter luxuriously. While these changes were going on abroad, trouble had come at home. But the letter telling that Beth was failing never reached Amy, and when the next found her, the grass was green above her sister. The sad news met her at Vevey, for the heat had driven them from Nice in May, and they had traveled slowly to Switzerland by way of Genoa and the Italian lakes. She bore it very well and quietly submitted to the family decree that she should not shorten her visit, for since it was too late to say goodbye to Beth, she had better stay and let the absence soften her sorrow. But her heart was very heavy. She longed to be at home and every day looked wistfully across the lake, waiting for Laurie to come and comfort her. He did come very soon, for the same mail brought letters to them both, but he was in Germany and it took some days to reach him. The moment he read it, he packed his knapsack, bade adieu to his fellow pedestrians, and was off to keep his promise with a heart full of joy and sorrow, hope and suspense. He knew Vevey well, and as soon as the boat touched the little quay, I know, Gracie, I know, it's bedtime. Go lay down in front of the fan. He knew Vevey well, and as soon as the boat touched the little quay, he hurried along the shore to Latour, where the Carrolls were living en pension. And the garçon was in despair that the whole family had gone to take a promenade on the lake. But no, the blonde mademoiselle might be in the chateau garden. If monsieur would give himself the pain of sitting down, a flash of time should prevent her. But monsieur would not wait for even a flash of time, and in the middle of the speech departed to find mademoiselle himself. A pleasant old garden on the borders of the lovely lake, with chestnuts rustling overhead, ivy climbing everywhere, and the black shadow of the tower falling far across the sunny water. At one corner of the wide, low wall was a seat, and here Amy often came to read or work or console herself with the beauty all about her. She was sitting here that day, leaning her head on her hand with a homesick heart and heavy eyes, thinking of Beth and wondering why Laurie did not come. She did not hear him cross the courtyard beyond, nor did she see him pause in the archway that led from the subterranean path into the garden. He stood a minute, looking at her with new eyes, seeing what no one had ever seen before, the tender side of Amy's character. Everything about her mutely suggested love and sorrow. The blotted letters in her lap, the black ribbon that tied up her hair, the womanly pain and patience in her face, even the little ebony cross at her throat seemed pathetic to Laurie, for he had given it to her and she wore it as her only ornament. If he had any doubts about the reception she would give him, they were set at rest the minute she looked up and saw him. For dropping everything, she ran to him, exclaiming, in a tone of unmistakable love and longing, "Oh, Laurie, Laurie, I knew you'd come to me." Or that was me. "Oh, Laurie, Laurie, I knew you'd come to me." I think everything was said and settled then. For as they stood together, quite silent for a moment, with the dark head bent down protectively over the light one, Amy felt that no one could comfort and sustain her so well as Laurie. And Laurie decided that Amy was the only woman in the world who could fill Joe's place and make him happy. He did not tell her so, but she was not disappointed, for both felt the truth, were satisfied, and gladly left the rest to silence. In a minute, Amy went back to her place, and while she dried her tears, Laurie gathered up the scattered papers, finding in sight and sundry well-worn letters and suggestive sketches, good omens for the future. As he sat down beside her, Amy felt shy again and turned rosy red at the recollection of her impulsive greeting. "I couldn't help it. I felt so lonely and sad and was so very glad to see you. It's such a surprise to look up and find you just as I was beginning to fear you wouldn't come," she said, trying in vain to speak quite naturally. "I came the minute I heard. I wish I could say something to comfort you for the loss of dear little Beth, but I can only feel and..." He could not get any further, for he too turned bashful all of a sudden and did not quite know what to say. He longed to lay Amy's head on his shoulder and tell her to have a good cry, but he did not dare, so took her hand instead and gave it a sympathetic squeeze that was better than words. "You needn't say anything. This comforts me," she said softly. "Beth is well and happy, and I mustn't wish her back. But I dread the going home as much as I long to see them all. We won't talk about it now, for it makes me cry, and I want to enjoy you while you stay. You needn't go back. You needn't go right back, need you?" "Not if you want me, dear." "I do so much. Aunt and Flo are very kind, but you seem like one of the family, and it would be so comfortable to have you for a little while." Amy spoke and looked like a homesick child whose heart was full that Laurie forgot his bashfulness all at once and gave her just what she wanted, the petting she was used to and the cheerful conversation she needed. "Poor little soul. You look as if you'd grieved yourself sick. Well, I'm going to take care of you, so don't cry any more, but come back and walk about with me. The wind is too chilly for you to sit still," he said in the half caressing, half commanding way that Amy liked, as he tied on her hat, drew her arm through his, and began to pace up and down the sunny walk under the new leaved chestnuts. We had a great big chestnut tree on the corner of our street when I was a kid. He felt more at peace upon his legs, and Amy found it very pleasant to have a strong arm to lean upon, a familiar face to smile at her, and a kind voice to talk delightfully for her alone. Excuse me. Excuse me. The quaint old garden had sheltered many pairs of lovers and seemed expressly made for them. So sunny and secluded was it, with nothing but the tower to overlook them and the wide lake to carry away the echo of their words as it rippled below. For an hour this new pair walked and talked, or rested on the wall, enjoying the sweet influences which gave a charm to time and place. And when an unromantic dinner bell warned them away, Amy felt as if she left the burden of loneliness and sorrow behind in the chateau garden. The moment Mrs. Carroll saw the girl's altered face, she was illuminated with a new idea and exclaimed to herself, "Now I understand it all. The child had been pining for young Lawrence. Bless my heart, I never thought of such a thing." With praiseworthy discretion, the good lady said nothing and betrayed no sign of enlightenment, but cordially urged Laurie to stay and begged Amy to enjoy his society, for it would do her more good than so much solitude. Amy was a model of docility, and as her aunt was a good deal occupied with Flo, she was left to entertain her friend and did it with more than her usual success. At Nice, Laurie had lounged and Amy had scolded. At Vevey, Laurie was never idle, but always walking, riding, boating, or studying in the most energetic manner, while Amy admired everything he did and followed his example as far and as fast as she could. He said the change was owing to the climate, and she did not contradict him, being glad of a like excuse for her own recovered health and spirits. The invigorating air did them both good, and much exercise worked wholesome changes in their minds as well as bodies. They seemed to get clearer views of life and duty up there among the everlasting hills. The fresh winds blew away desponding doubts, delusive fancies, and moody mists. The warm spring sunshine brought out all sorts of aspiring ideas, tender hopes, and happy thoughts. The lake seemed to wash away the troubles of the past, and the grand old mountain to look benignly down upon them, saying, "Little children, love one another." In spite of the new sorrow, it was a very happy time, so happy that Laurie could not bear to disturb it by a word. It took him a little while to recover from his surprise at the rapid cure of his first, and he had firmly believed that his last and only love. It took him a little while to recover from his surprise at the rapid cure of his first, and as he had firmly believed, his last and only love. He consoled himself for the seeming disloyalty by the thought that Joe's sister was almost the same as Joe herself, and the conviction that it would have been impossible to love any other woman but Amy so soon and so well. His first wooing had been of the tempestuous order, and he looked back upon it as if through a long vista of years, with a feeling of compassion blended with regret. He was not ashamed of it, but put it away as one of the bittersweet experiences of his life, for which he could be grateful when the pain was over. His second wooing, he resolved, should be as calm and as simple as possible. There was no need of having a scene, hardly any need of telling Amy that he loved her. She knew it without words, and given him his answer long ago. It all came about so naturally that no one could complain, and he knew that everybody would be pleased, even Joe. But when our first little passion has been crushed, we are apt to be wary and slow in making the second trial. So Laurie let the days pass, enjoying every hour and leaving to chance the utterance of the word that would put an end to the first and sweetest part of this new romance. He had rather imagined that the denouement would take place in the chateau garden by moonlight and in the most graceful and decorous manner, but it turned out exactly the reverse, for the matter was settled on the lake at noonday in a few blunt words. They had been floating about all morning from the gloomy St. Gingolph to the sunny Montreux, with the Alps of Savoy on one side and Mount St. Bernard and the Dent du Midi on the other, pretty Vevey in the valley, and Lausanne upon the hill beyond a cloudless sky blue overhead, and the bluer lake below, dotted with the picturesque boats that looked like white-winged gulls. They had been talking of Bonnivard, and as they glided past Chillon of Rousseau, I'm probably mangling these names, guys, and as they looked up at Clarens, where he wrote his Heloise, neither had read it, but they knew it was a love story, and each privately wondered if it was half as interesting as their own. Amy had been dabbling her hand in the water during the little pause that fell between them. And when she looked up, Laurie was leaning on his oars with an expression in his eyes that made her say hastily, merely for the sake of saying something, "You must be tired. Rest a little and let me row. It will do me good. For since you came, I've been altogether lazy and luxurious." "I'm not tired, but you may take an oar if you like. There's room enough, though I only have to sit nearly in the middle, else the boat won't trim," returned Laurie, as he rather liked the arrangement. Feeling that she had not mended matters much, Amy took the offered third seat, shook her hair over her face, and accepted an oar. She rowed as well as many other things, and though she used both hands, and Laurie but one, the oars kept time, and the boat went smoothly through the water. "How well we pull together, don't we?" said Amy, who objected to silence just then. "So well that I wish we might always pull in the same boat. Will you, Amy?" Very tenderly. "Yes, Laurie." Then they both stopped rowing and unconsciously added a pretty little tableau of human love and happiness to the dissolving views reflected in the lake. Thank you, Linda. You know you're my strongest supporter. Listen, folks, I'm really hoping to get some work done in the garden this weekend. And I was a little depressed today. I've been going through negatives for my brother's celebration of life, which is next Saturday. And yeah. And so a lot of memories come up, and they're beautiful memories. But, every time you think, "Oh, I remember that day," and then you get blindsided by a little bit of grief saying, "Oh, I'm never going to have a day like that again with that person." You know what I mean? So I'm getting there. Um, and I'm doing good. I loved my brother very, very much. This is Mrs. Volpe from Reading with Beverly Volpe saying, I will see you next Thursday night at the same time. Take care. God bless. And remember, you're loved. I don't have to see you to love you.